Implausible Nature now has dice. That's right, you can get these awesome D6s made by our partner, Baron of Dice. These custom dice have the Implausible Nature logo on the sixth side and also come with square corners, which means they will roll more evenly than rounded corner dice. Head on over to baronofdice.com and use discount code IN40K to get a discount on your order and support us at the same time. Check out his full collection of dice for all your gaming needs with the link down in the description. Welcome to Implausible Nature, your home for all things Black Templar. On today's video, we're going to be talking about trade units and trade style lists. So to get right into it, let's start off with what is a trade unit, Bob?
All right. So, in the most basic terms, a trade unit is a unit that you can put on the board, typically on an objective that you don't mind dying. And then you typically have another unit after that unit dies come and kill your opponent's unit. So, you're basically trading units back and forth over the course of the game to control objectives. That's the goal. So, and the reason why this is important is we do have secondaries like shock tactics that requires you to take an objective from an opponent to score the points. Now it's 4 points for that. So obviously that's a good chunk of points, and it's one of our higher scoring points that now that it's got buffed a little bit. But it allows you to put minimal points into a squad typically and play a game where it forces your opponents to react to what you're doing, which is a fundamental part of playing competitive 40k. Now, if you're playing reactive, you're on the back foot and you're typically going to lose because you don't really have the initiative. You can't make the decisions on what's going on in the game. And you really want to be able to decide the flow of the game, decide what units are going to be traded, um, so to speak, and really dictate how that game is going. You want to be able to dictate which objectives are going to be scored by you or your opponent, which units are going to die, that type of thing. So now a trade unit doesn't necessarily have to be a small unit. It could be a bigger unit, but it's really something that you don't mind dying, that doesn't take up a ton of points, and uh, you can kill something with. You want to try and be able to kill more than its value, typically.
Sounds a
Just
lot like what units that I used to call, or still kind of do, popcorn units. Units that are cheap enough that you don't care if it dies, but are deadly enough that your opponent can't ignore them. So you
yep.
force your opponent into wasting resources to kill this unit, which you don't care if it does anything or not. I think it's a little different in this respect. Like a land speeder is a popcorn unit, right? It's so cheap that we don't care if it dies, but it can also deal some pretty good damage. But I think these units are more, we want to make sure that they are they are doing something, right? Which is the difference there. So what kind of units are we talking about here? What give us some examples and how you might use those?
All right. So I'm going to start with the biggest uh, example of this. It's not in the Templars army, but most players by now have experienced what a trade unit is simply from this unit. So the Drukari have an excellent trade unit in the form of the Incubi. So I don't recall their points, but they're just over 100 points for what they do. And they're 5 man. Typically, they can kill pretty much anything on the charge.
They're scary.
They're very scary,
They're very scary.
but they can't take a hit. So if you can get into them and you can ensure that you attack them first, because they do have some abilities to make your unit strike last,
Which is obnoxious.
but they fold like a wet paper bag. But the
like
thing
like
is,
most Eldar do.
they don't take very many points, but they hit above their weight limit. So that is a perfect trade unit. An example for the Black Templars is a good trade unit. It can be in the troop slot. It could be something like the Incursors. Now, they don't necessarily kill something, but they are a good trade unit in that they bait units to them. So the goal of a trade unit is to bait your opponent to come to you to kill you so that you can kill them, right? So incursors, I've talked about incursors a lot and how I feel they're a necessary part of the game, or more accurately, concealed position units. But incursors also have that rule.
Yeah.
So you go on to an objective early on in the game. You bait your opponent to get to that objective, come out of their deployment zone, out of their comfort zone, because they feel like very confident they're going to be able to kill those incursors. Ideally,
Most things can.
yeah,
Generic Space Marines with no debuffs really. So
ideally you are hiding them so they're not shot off the board. That's the key. You want to try and have them come in close combat with them, ideally.
yeah,
Um, but obviously not. It's not always going to work out that way. 40k. You're playing against another human. They're not going to be dumb usually, so it doesn't always work out that way. But they're gonna die, right? So your opponent's baited out, and then you take a unit, whether it be something like the Vanguard Vets. Vanguard Vets are an excellent trade unit if you take them in minimal squads. So dual Lightning Claw Vanguard Vets can shred infantry very, very well. And if you put on something like a Fist of Balthus on them or a Sword of Judgment, they can strike even heavier, more elite units, or maybe even a vehicle, do some damage to a vehicle if you need to. Obviously, they're not going to take down a vehicle by themselves in a 5-man unit, but they will make sure that they kill whatever infantry unit that is there, right? 9 times out of 10, they'll do that, especially if you have chaplain support or if you are able to get another unit in there. Um, Sometimes the way it works that maybe your opponent doesn't actually get enough oomph into killing your unit. Maybe they don't kill that incursor. While you have that Vanguard veteran come up from behind those cover, jump on there because they're not contesting you, right? And
yeah,
between the two of them, you can kill that unit, and now you have that objective. Can consolidate back into some cover, depending on your vow. Get out of line of sight so you're not going to get shot, and do the same thing again. Trading, in my opinion, is the way to go with Black Templars right now. And we'll get into the other styles of list. I feel like there's 3 different styles. There's the trade style. There's the more durable, take a hit, hold the center of the board on your side of the board, and then the more balanced list. But this is the style that I feel is most competitive. Um, I will say there's been some people that have been very skeptical of this, and they've got to use it themselves, and they're being very successful. I won't shout out anyone specific, but there's those in the various Black Templars discords that have been using this and have been very successful with it. As I mentioned,
nice.
it does not require minimal squads. I prefer minimal squads, uh, but you could use something like a Primaris Crusader squad to
hmm
bait your opponent out. So,
They're a great trade unit because they're relatively cheap for what they are. 178 points gets you 10 guys with 2 power fists and a power sword. And a truckload of chainsword attacks. So, I mean, you can bait your opponent out with one of those. If they don't kill them, if they don't wipe the squad, if you have even 3 guys left, you've got all your power weapons to swing. So they're still can deal some damage and help whatever else is coming in there.
yep,
And if your opponent happens to flub their rolls and not roll well, the dice gods didn't favor them, even better. But it's a great unit for that, and you know pretty efficient points wise for what you get from it.
yep. And kind of touching on briefly touched on just a moment ago, I feel it's the most competitive because it unlocks the most secondaries for our builds. So I've talked in several videos the last couple months that we've put out that banners is kind of an auto take for us right now, simply because it's the most consistent. All of our styles of list can do it. What
Yeah.
it's not list dependent, and it'll score you consistently. I should say, if you're playing the game correctly, I won't say correctly. There could all everyone has bad games, right? But if you lay out your list the correct way on the board and you make the correct decisions in game, you should get between 8 and 12 points reliably per
Yeah.
game. But you could even max it. Um,
Yeah.
so
And that's another thing too, where those incursors, or concealed positions really
yeah,
come into play, is because, if you end up with first turn, now you're raising a banner on that objective, which helps you out a lot. Um, so yeah, I know you have a list with some trade units. I know you also have Terminators in that list. Um, what's your strategy as far as if you're baiting someone to the middle of the board? When you do that, are you going to use, if they're in the middle of the board, are you going to use a slower unit like Terminators to go after them, or are you going to, send your Vanguard vets, deeper because they're already faster, deeper into your opponent's zone? What's your kind of strategy with using those two units?
okay. So I'll touch on those units specifically. We'll do a list review and my
We're
strategy,
definitely going to do a list review on this list because I really like this list a lot.
but you don't have to build the list like this. But in theory, I typically bait with my troops units because we have stratagems to be able to make our core into objectives secured units. So for Black Templars, we are effective in being able to do that once every turn, essentially. So I use my CP typically to do that every turn. So do I use Devout Push? Yes, I do leave a few extra CP on the board when I build my list, so I can use Devout Push to get in strategic positions. But I bait with my troops. In my particular list, I have multiple close combat units. I have 6 of them actually that are able to respond to a unit coming at my troops or an objective and be able to deal with them. So I have two separate units of sword brethren, primary sword brethren. I have 2 units of Vanguard veterans, and I have 2 units of relic terminators. And it really just depends on the threat. So I a lot of times I'll deep strike my terminators more times than not, simply because I want to have that threat to keep my opponent in their deployment zone, so they're not going to leave their deployment zone potentially because they don't want to give up their objective or their flank
Yeah.
necessarily. So I'll deep strike them, so it'll kind of scare them. Uh, do they get screened out? Yeah, maybe, but I don't really care because relic terminators are relatively cheap, right? And I keep them in
Yep.
5-man squads. So they can deal with threats that I need them to deal with and deep strike them in, depending on what it is. And I have a chaplain that is running Canticles of Hate, uh, Exhortation of Rage. So if I need them to drop in, I can pop a stratagem to auto pass Canticles so they can get that deep strike if I need to, the 7-inch charge if I absolutely need to, depending on the battle. But maybe I don't need to, and I can walk them, right? Not ideal, but I can get them up into the center board to respond to a threat. Or maybe I just get them onto an objective right away and dare my opponent to come at them. So they're going to swing because they're fairly durable, but they're 5
Yep.
units, less than 200 points. If they die, they're going to take something down with them. And that's when
Yep.
something like the Vanguard veterans who were playing very cagey behind ruins, out of sight, line of sight, because most tournaments play first layer of ruins or line of sight blocking. Some don't, but even if it's not, you can hide 5-man Vanguard veterans.
They're pretty easy to
Yeah,
hide behind a wall, a ruins wall, and still get obscuring from
yep,
them. So
absolutely. So, I mean, you drop in, you get the 12-inch range. Again, you got the chaplain in there that can extend ranges if you need to. Between the Terminators, what they did in damage to whatever that target was, and the Vanguard vets, they're going to kill whatever it is, and now you have the objective again. And you're getting your shock tactics. So the goal
yeah,
is to give layers of different assault units and still have some shooting. The Relic Terminators still have some shooting. I have other parts in my list that do that, to be able to
yeah,
put shots downrange, because you obviously want to soften up everything that's coming at you before they get there. You don't want to
yep,
like take a full unit of Scarab Terminators or something, or Grey Knight Terminators to the face, because you're not going to kill those guys. So,
yeah, exactly. So, so we kind of talked about the units that we want to use, and how we want to trade into our opponent. What about because our opponents are potentially playing a trade style list themselves, whether it be Space Marines or whether it be Xenos or some other faction. How do we avoid landing in their bait trap of, oh, I've got this unit here, and then I want you to, I'm going to bait us, I should say, with, that unit. How do we avoid falling into that trap, and how do we, uh, you know, uh, get around that, so to
all right.
speak?
So the most important thing is to always go into the game with a plan. So if you're in a tournament setting, you will obviously be reviewing your opponent's list with, sharing list abilities, that type of thing, with your opponent beforehand. So you should be formulating what you're going to be kind of doing as far as the game. You'll know what the mission is ahead of time. And if you're not even not at a tournament, if you're playing maybe a local game store or a pre-planned game, you'll typically know the mission that you are playing. You'll know the opponent's army, not necessarily their list, but a lot of times you'll know the list too. And you just develop a plan before the game. So the key is to not be too aggressive on it, because if you throw trade units around, we don't have enough of them to waste. So Space Marines cannot waste units. We've talked in other interviews and how people feel, how they run. Um, we can play a little bit aggressive with the Space Marines, but don't commit too far into the board without support pieces. So if you trade a unit, you have to have something that is nearby that can to get to trade
Trade
back.
back,
So you are
right?
pre-planning for that unit to die or to take a hit or whatever it may be, depending on what that army is, where it's on the board, turn, that type of thing. You're pre-planning that. But the best place to be in at least my style, like MSU, I play MSU trade, is to be the center of the board in my half of the board. And then I have the threat of the deep strike if I need to for my Terminators on
Yeah,
that. But even then, I still have other layers of my list that can get
of
there
threats.
if I
Yeah,
need to. You don't want to get too far over there,
yeah,
because ultimately, no man's land is where all of the objectives are and your side of the board.
mostly.
So
Yep.
you want to be fighting and baiting over the center. So if an opponent is trying to bait you towards the center, you want to be there anyway. And there are armies that hold the center of the board better than us, like Stodes.
Yeah.
A lot of different versions of like Tyranids do that better than us. But
Hmm.
typically, we can have more units with them. So that's where we can consolidate several units into one of their more durable units at the same time. But if you overcommitted to the other side of the board, then you're not going to be able to do that. You know, ideally, you're going to be at 14 to 16 units on the board that you can condensed. Like you can throw 3 units at a Custodes unit and take them down, and make sure you get that objective, and then spread them out if you need to, because you don't want to get like multi-charged and get yourself in a bad situation
Yeah.
With that. But you really kind of have to play each game individually. But the goal is to make sure that you're aggressive, but not too aggressive. Hold back depending on your opponent. The center of the board and your half of the board is really kind of your play. Fight over the center
Yeah.
and the no man. That's where it is. If they're trying to bait you to their side of the board, don't play that game. That's not where you want to be, because a lot of times those armies that are trying to do that are like Drakari that can outmaneuver you, and then
Yeah.
they'll get on your side of the board, and then you can't react fast enough.
No, I think this is definitely an important thing that we've talked about. Hopefully, everyone watching has gotten some good information, because this is something that you're going to see even if you don't particularly want to play this style of list. This is something that you're going to see in tournaments. A lot of tournament players are running the style list, even people who are playing casual games, because they're learning from tournament players in order to get better, or people who are the more competitive folks there are that they're learning from are going to teach them to run these styles of
Mhm.
lists. So even if you don't personally run this style of list or want to, it's good information to know what to look for, right? Um, yeah, hopefully everyone enjoyed this video. Make sure you hit that like button and subscribe so you can get notified on all of our latest content. Let us know what you think down in the comments. What types of lists have you been running? Have you been running trade lists? Have you been running trade units? That sort of thing. And check us out on Discord. We have a really active community with a lot of great folks giving great advice every day to help you get better at Black Templars, which is the main goal here, right? Of course. And we also have a Patreon. We love all the support our Patreons give us. You get cool things like Discord roles and early access to videos, that sort of thing. So check us out, and until next time, keep on crusading.